So you also have this American university thing which you run. What is that about?
Director of Advancement at the Hindu University of America. We are trying to build another Nalanda that will outlast yours, mine, and the future generations.
So when you talk about returning to your roots, to the Sanatana Dharma,
A slightly upper middle class, conservative Hindu family, large family, parents, four siblings, grandparents, two adopted sisters.
the books itself, if you look at the classic epics or whatever you want to call it by any other name, Ramayana or Mahabharata or anything for that. The Mahabharata itself has so many characters.
Allow me to answer this in just 30 seconds. Haters, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, to me it's not a fight. To me, I'm not out to, defame anybody. If you direct target in my fight for my own civilizational identity, then that's not my fault.
New Testament, the Old Testament, and also the Bible. Can you take us through some of the learnings that you had, which you described?
My reasons for quitting Christianity are very accurate because I was angry at God. Of course, the Christian, when I first came out with my story, that's how the Christian summed it all up.
Welcome to Conversations. I'm Suresh Kochattil. Authors often paint different pictures. They talk about their life, they talk about their journeys, but more importantly, they talk about life changing situations. Sometimes a walk back into sunshine. I have with me one such person here, Esther Dhanraj, an author, a kind of Hindu activist, Christian activist, whatever you want to call it, by any name. But I think the activist word itself is kind of not relevant today. She wears many hats. She kind of has an academic background and she does a lot of other activities based out of the US. But more importantly, I will let her do the talking today and less of me talking. Usually it's the other way around. So today I will do less of talking and I'll let Esther talk about herself. Welcome to the show, Esther.
Thank you so much, Suresh.
Now I would leave you to do the introduction. First 2 minutes is all yours to do the introduction and then we'll get on to the Q&A.
Yeah, you've already introduced me. I sure wear many hats. And the most important hat is I identify myself as a Christian studies scholar.
Okay.
So that puts me in the academician category. So I'm not an activist, not Christian activist, definitely. Not trying to fight with anybody. So
Okay.
truth matters to me, and I'll just leave it at that.
So you also have this American university thing which you run. What is that all about?
So I'm a director of advancement at the Hindu University of America, based in Orlando,
Okay.
US.
And what activity do they do?
It is a regular full-fledged university.
Okay.
We are going towards our accreditation. We want to be an accredited university. Now, since you asked what are you planning to do here, we are trying to build another Nalanda that will outlast yours, mine, and the future
Generations
generations
from here on.
that will
Great.
last for 1,000 years and more.
Other day, Esther was at one of the book launches, her book launch here in Hyderabad. She's been traveling around the country in Bhagyanagar here to speak about her book, which was an event organized by Pragna Bharati. And I actually listened to her conversation and I was quite kind of taken aback by the way she puts her things up straightforward without, calling it by any other name. And she's very, very forthright. Maybe that offends some people, so be it. But I think that is the way things work out. But she did write the book, and I have the book here with me, which is Unbaptized. And this is the book that Esther has written, in which she says why I left Christianity and returned to my roots. The book, the first few pages of the book itself is a great introduction by many people, from Anand Ranganathan to others who written bits about what she wrote in the entire book. There's a long forward there again. And of course, then comes the real story. And here today, we are to discover that story from Esther herself. Esther, can you talk us through why you wrote this book or what made you write this book?
So, the book has a story to tell, a story which is very important for the Indic civilization. And as we speak, we are in the middle of reclaiming our civilizational identity as Hindus in the world. So, this book contributes immensely to that dialogue, that conversation that we are trying to have here. So I thought it's a deeply personal story, and it's not just my story, personally my story. It's the story of my family members, meaning my parents and my siblings. Now that's a very hard thing to write, because you as an individual can speak for yourself, but you cannot speak even for your children these days. but I have gone ahead and spoken for six other people, and that in itself is a very hard decision for me to take. But I had to write it because, like I said, this story is very important for the ongoing civilizational conversation that we are having today.
So, when you talk about returning to your roots, to the Sanatana Dharma, obviously there would have been a starting point for all this. When actually you left Sanatana Dharma, or your entire siblings and the family left Sanatana Dharma and went to the other side of it. What made you all do it? I would say you all, when I meant you all, it's you're speaking again for everybody else in this and that particular genre of things.
So we were a very a slightly upper middle class Hindu, conservative Hindu family, large family, parents, four siblings. I have four siblings, grandparents, adopted two adopted sisters, and of course dogs.
Oh,
First
that's
two, and
very
then one dog.
okay.
So this was the household, and like every family, like every other family in the world, my family also went through a rough patch, and after surviving several rough patches, during one rough phase in my parents' lives, they were introduced to Christianity by a neighbor. So that was a time that actually brought the whole change, the turn in our lives. That's when my family was introduced to Christianity. Now, it's not like my parents did not go through rough phases with such a big family in in a middle class Indian middle class,
Okay.
or middle class for that any matter. I mean, anywhere in the world. But they did not get converted before that, right? That was the only time that they converted. The what is the difference? Why did they get converted at that point and not
Time, yeah,
before?
that's a question actually that's obviously there.
Right. This time, their neighbor was a Christian, and Christians have the knack of smelling vulnerability. And your Christian neighbor, your Christian classmate, your Christian colleague, it could be anybody. They're all trained to look for vulnerabilities, especially in Hindu families. If you talk about Christians in India, from the context of Indian Christians, they're trained, they have an eye for catching a trouble in a Hindu family when they come across one.
So just I'll stop you here for a second and I'll ask you a question. I often see this. My ex-maid, we had a maid for a long time in our old house where we were living in Trimalgiri. And when we left that and came to Alwal, after a few years I met her and then suddenly she said, I would go to the church. I said, what happened? And she used to, a lady who used to go to temple, used to do Batkama, all that stuff. I said, why church? She said, in Christian I. So I asked her why, and she said how she had lost her husband, very very maid level people. So she had lost her husband who was a mason, and I asked how did he convert? Why did he convert? She said when there's a trouble, uh, I had to pay the priest to do a huge puja thing for the ninth day and all that. Spent a lot of money, but on the 15th or 16th day, a pastor turned up at the door and he said I came to offer my condolences, and one thing led to another and she was a Christian in no time. You did speak about that part, about the vulnerability part of it. Is the picking from the bottom of the pyramid, or in your case, as you say, it's upper middle class family, does it make a difference where they hit?
So there's no one size fits all in the
Okay.
Christian message, the kind of messaging that they offer to different classes of our society. They're all different. So they tweak their message that they have to offer according to the person that they are addressing, that they are trying to convert. In my parents' case, my parents were, my father was a very educated man, learned man. He was a voracious reader, well traveled, very, very socially active. They were not socially disadvantaged. I would say they were not economically also disadvantaged, but still they ended up becoming Christians. So to say that it's only the marginalized communities that get converted would be an incorrect statement. Now, I said vulnerability. Vulnerability could be financial vulnerability, social discrimination. Vulnerability could be health.
Emotional.
Emotional, relationships, even rich get converted. A lot of our film actors and actresses are converted Christians. What made them convert? So, anything emotional trauma, addiction, addiction to substances, um, it could be anything. Any vulnerable situation a human being faces, the Christians are there to hold
Hold
you.
you. Now,
Hold
that's
you.
where I faulted. In fact, I often say this in many debates, and I got kind of roundly trolled for this. Basically, I say that the gods in Hindu pantheon don't need too many kiritams, don't need so many odyanams, don't need so many diamonds and rubies. Why don't you instead concentrate on building a small clinic, building a small school, or doing something that would help the vulnerable sections of the society? The gods have what they want. Beyond a point, the temple, because that's a structure around which the Hindu family was originally built, the temple, a neighborhood temple. But now that has also lost its relevance. But the point was, when we talk of somebody and refer to them as rice bags, awfully, that means somebody was taking care of them when they really needed help. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and that's how I begin my book.
That's what I did
Yeah,
see that.
I have a great objection to that word rice bag
Yeah,
converts. Rice bag is not always a rice bag. Now it's kind of become a metaphor for any need,
any day.
any need. And the question that we need to ask is, when we say that somebody got converted just for a rice bag, somebody would stay back in their religion, which is in Hinduism, if you were to offer the same rice bag.
Exactly. That's what the point was.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So instead of just blaming that the other party is strong, well funded, well oiled, and all that, why don't you stand up for your own?
if you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, that's what,
Simple,
yeah.
isn't it? So carry on.
So rice bag is the starting point of the conversation, I would say. And the day we sit back and ask this question, if somebody is willing to get converted for just a rice bag, they will not get converted for the same rice bag. If rice bag is all it takes, why don't you give it before the church gives it? So
That's a
I
good.
think we should ask this question, and the day we ask this question and go looking for a solution to this question, that would be the beginning of the end of war against conversions.
In fact, that's exactly the point. The point is, as often Bishop Desmond Tutu famously said once, when the missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. And then they said, close your eyes and pray. And before you know, they had our land and we had the Bible. This is exactly the point, is that they are able to kind of see who needs to go to which side, and then they convert them. And because they have to increase the numbers anyway, I mean, be it a pastor or a bishop right up there, everybody has certain targets to meet at the end of the day. And they do that religious, which is why they're called missionaries in the first place.
Right,
I mean,
right,
you can name it from Mother Teresa to anybody for that matter. They all have the same philosophy, that we need to increase our number. Something very similar in Islam also.
right.
It's possibly the Hindu religion, which is very, very docile, which is saying, okay, you can abuse our gods, you can make fun of our gods, we will not say anything to you. But the fact that other day when you were speaking also, you did make a point about the New Testament, the Old Testament, and also the Bible. Can you take us through some of the learnings that you had, which you described in the book?
So my reasons for quitting Christianity are very academic. That's all. That's what I call them. They're not emotional. They're not because I was angry at God. Of course, the Christian, when I first came out with my story, that's how the Christian summed it all up. They said, "Oh, she's just angry with God. She'll come back. She prayed for something that didn't get fulfilled. Therefore, it's just emotional." It is not. It is anything but. Now, if I had the tendency to change my religion, such a fanatic Christian I was, if I had the tendency to abandon it because of emotional reasons, I've had many chances as a Christian in my 25-year Christian life. I've had huge reasons to quit Christianity. One was when my brother passed away. My brother was 23 and he passed in his sleep. I was very close to him, but I justified God's actions in his death. And I said, God was actually doing us a favor by taking him away.
You
You can
justify
read
it that
that.
way.
Yeah, I will leave it at that. I want the viewers to go grab a copy of the book and read, because if I were to open that story, I wouldn't be doing justice to it. It's very nuanced. So it's described in more than 2 or 3 pages. So one has to read what I mean.
So when you actually you went into theology and you did all that stuff. But having gone so much into the depth of Christianity, into terms of learning from that, how difficult was it turning back from that point in time?
Yeah, but I still didn't
Yeah, you
get to
haven't finished
answer
that part.
that part. Yeah,
Yes,
so
please
I was
continue.
taking the long route. So I went into a seminary to get they're academic. My reasons are academic, right? How are they academic? How did they become academic? Now I wanted to become a pastor. I was so fundamentalist in my approach to my faith. I wanted to become a pastor and eventually return to India at some point and Christianize India. That was the goal with which I went into a seminary. I wanted to become a qualified pastor, unlike the pastors that you see today. I wanted to be well rooted in the Christian education. So I went to a seminary, and for the first time as a seminary student. Now, seminary is a place where Christian studies are
Yeah.
taught, theology is taught, and the graduates from a seminary become pastors and apologists. Now, as a seminarian, student of Christian studies, I had the opportunity to view my faith through an academic lens for the first time in 25 years.
Okay.
I was a 25-year Christian at that time. I was a Christian for 25 years. So, viewing your faith through the academic lens as opposed to viewing your faith from a faith lens,
Okay.
that was the difference. So when I started scrutinizing, subjecting the Christian theology, the doctrines, Christian history, and even the existence of Jesus or the validity of Yahweh to logical scrutiny, that is when it started falling apart.
Things didn't add up.
Everything that I had been taught up until then proved to be false. So much so that I started questioning the historicity of Jesus, the very deity that I breathed, lived, talked to, prayed to for 25 years.
The devil's advocate. In a way, yeah. So that's Esther is very, very logical, if you ask me, because then it's not that you just jump ship like that or you came back in the same ship. But the point was, at some point in time, you felt that the religion that you were enamored in by 25 years of being there didn't look very logical, didn't add up things. Is that a point in when you argue with people? I'm not even saying argument, when you're actually having a debate with people who sit on the other side of the fence and say, look, Jesus did exist. Jesus did die for your sins. Jesus went up the cross, did all that for you, and you are now saying Jesus didn't exist. How do you kind of argue that point out?
So it's not me who's saying it. Like I said, I have delved deeply into Christian scholarship on both sides, both
Okay.
the for side and the against side. Now, there's so much of critical scholarship that has done the job for us. It is for us to evaluate, study through both the for
Okay.
and against, and evaluate, apply logic, and then conclude which side makes more sense. So, in that approach of mine, I have read the for arguments for the existence of Jesus, and I have read the for the non-existence of Jesus, for the mythicism of Jesus. And I felt the mythicists, people that are saying that Jesus did not exist, make more sense, because the evidence for Jesus is not doesn't add up. I wouldn't say it's not valid, but it's not enough. It is not enough. For example, why weren't there no eyewitness accounts of Jesus? The earliest account of Jesus was at least 30 to 40 years after the supposed death of Jesus.
There's no written records,
There's
nothing.
no written records. Forget about eyewitnesses, no contemporary records also.
That's not what we are told. We said that people saw him coming and, being born, and then, people saw him taking people around, speaking to them, finally being nailed to the cross, dying for the people, the resurrection and all the part. Nothing happened.
That is all told in 4 books of the New Testament, which are called the Gospels. Outside of the Bible, there is no written record of Jesus, even by those who have supposedly lived in Jesus's neighborhood, people from history. Okay, if Jesus existed, let's say Jesus existed, he would have lived in a certain neighborhood. People from history, like Philo of Alexandria, he would have lived in the same time and in the same neighborhood as Jesus existed. And he wrote immensely. Now, Rome, first century Rome, was the best recorded time in history. So, Jewish and Roman writers were recording every small, medium, and big event occurring in Rome. But no mention of the earthquake that is mentioned in the Gospels, which opened up the earth and 500 dead bodies rose and walked toward the city at the time of Jesus' resurrection, or death, at the time of Jesus' death on the cross.
So,
Okay.
so you're saying it's a hearsay?
It is a myth. It's
Okay.
a myth, not
Okay.
hearsay, not
It's a
even
myth.
hearsay. For hearsay, there has to have something,
Something.
maybe not of that much, that intensity, but something. There's nothing. It
But
was
when you
just a
had
myth.
debates, that's exactly what my question was. When somebody's sitting on the other side of the fence and arguing it out, like the other day, there was a gentleman in the audience who was asking you questions. Obviously, he was a Christian by faith. And naturally, at any debate, it's good. And I believe you insisted that he should be there in the audience
Mhm.
and that he should not go away. So the point is, when you argue and when you argue logically, are the other side able to convince you and say, no, 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 you're wrong? They would obviously do that. And they are right.
Okay, so what is your evidence for saying that I'm wrong? Or rather, what is your evidence to say that Jesus existed? They will give the same evidence that has been debunked time and again for almost 100 years now.
Okay.
So, historical Jesus studies is nothing new. You know, it's been around for 100 years, at least 100 years.
So when you say all this Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and you look at the entire gamut of Jesus' life that he lived, and then the church comes up, and the church believes exactly in what was written, you would to say that the entire thing is questionable.
Okay, I'll ask you a counter question. You've heard of King Arthur,
Yeah.
right? We even have a King Arthur's round table, right? King Arthur's sword was also
Excalibur.
there, right? Excalibur. Now, does King Arthur exist? Is he a historical? He was a legend, right? He was a political tool, right? Of one kingdom at one point. Now there is another example from our times, Betty Crocker.
Okay.
Betty Crocker is anybody who has visited the US will know, the West will know who Betty Crocker is. There's a huge product line on Betty Crocker's name.
Yeah.
Betty Crocker had a radio show where she would answer questions of housewives about kneading the dough or cutting vegetables, washing vegetables, and everything pertaining to food,
Yeah.
food making. Betty Crocker also had used to write letters
Okay.
to her listeners, but Betty Crocker doesn't exist.
Who was she
There
then?
is no Betty Crocker. It's a marketing tool. It's a marketing tool. Then another example is Harry Potter. Today, Harry Potter has a huge, Disney World.
That's following
There's the
them.
most expensive place to go to. Harry Potter. Harry Potter's story was set in real time London. Okay, on a real railway station. There are real time names. Does that make Harry Potter real?
Obviously, that the flip side of the argument is very clear. When you look at the Sanatana Dharma and the way the opponents of Sanatana Dharma would question, saying, did you see Lord Ram anywhere? You see the Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu asking, oh, did he exist? Did that bridge that was built to Sri Lanka or Lanka, the old Lanka, was really exist? Ram Setu? Did anybody see Lord Krishna? But the Hindu mythology is such that, as they say, we have Muppai Mood Kot Devatalu, they say that one in Telugu. The point is often that certain legends are believable, but then who wrote the Bible? The question would be like, as much as you say, who wrote Bhagavad Gita, when they start arguing, did you hear this argument when you were going back to Hinduism or when you're going back to the Sanatana Dharma, where you originally hailed from? Was that argument on the other side also equally convincing? That did something exist on the other side? Or were you able to kind of counter that argument too?
So, how I would answer that question is first of all, I haven't explored Hinduism completely to sit here and say for sure as an expert. I will leave that to the experts of Hinduism, okay, the debaters on behalf of Hinduism. But when you are talking about comparative religion, yes, I had been asked this question. So, is Hinduism so convincing? Now, whether Hinduism is convincing or not is besides the matter. But we are dealing here about a history centric religion that is based on one deity, one being, and one scripture, as opposed to Hinduism, which is actually a way of life. It's not a faith, it's not based on one person, it's
Correct.
not a religion per se. Okay, much as we would like to equate it with religions, because there is no equivalent of dharma in English, because of which we started calling it a religion. So, this religion, Christianity, is history centered. You argue, and if you were to win the argument about in Jesus' historicity debate, if you were to win, if you're a mythicist and say that Jesus did not exist and you win that argument, Christianity collapses. I am not saying this. Paul himself said in the New Testament that if Jesus did not resurrect, you know the resurrection, right?
Yes,
He
third
got
day.
up on the
Yeah,
third day,
third
not
day. Yeah.
exactly third day, 1.5 days later, he got up from the grave. He died on a Friday afternoon. He got up on
Is it
Sunday. How is
scientifically
that 3
possible?
days?
Scientifically possible?
That's even besides the point. But Paul is saying that if the resurrection did not happen, a Christian's faith is in vain, which means they are basing the entire religion on one historical event. So if you debunk the claim that Jesus did not exist, he was not born of a virgin, he did not die on the cross, he did not rise on the third day, Christianity just crumbles.
The entire argument
But
goes.
even if a Christian were to win the argument that Rama did not exist or Krishna did not exist, Hinduism will still stand.
That's the
Would
power
you
of
agree?
Sanatana Dharma.
That's the power of Sanatana Dharma. So it's not dependent on only one scripture. It is not dependent on any one being, one deity. Why 33 crore gods? They can add more zeros to it. Nobody cares.
In fact, that the books itself, if you look at the classic, the epics, or whatever you want to call it by any other name, Ramayana or Mahabharata or anything for that matter, Mahabharata itself has so many characters, right from the most righteous ones to the most villainous ones. Everybody exists in the bargain. I mean, we had Amir Khan driving Lord Shiva around the toilet in Three Idiots, and people like us were laughing at it.
Yeah.
But that is what Hinduism is all about. There's no sartan pe juda there, then that happens there. But the point I'm bringing as we come to close is, I don't want to kind of be a spoiler and talk everything about your book here, because I want the audience itself to buy this book. I mean, it's available on Amazon in India, and you can buy this book, Unbaptized, but Esther's story about why she left Christianity and returned to her roots. Um, it's a brilliantly written book. I haven't also gone through it completely, but let me be very honest about it. But the first 50 pages of it itself makes a very interesting read, very compelling reason to write and read the rest of the book. But my point as we close this conversation, Esther, would be in terms of the number of haters that you would have on the other side of the fence when you came back to your roots, as much as the people who would mock you for having found your way back, there would have been others on the fence on the other side who would have started criticizing you or even kind of hate messages on you. Did you go through all that?
Um, uh, Allow me to answer this in just 30 seconds
Sure,
later.
please
I
take.
just first want to make that, put it on record. So 33 koti. Koti
Koti
is
is
a
not exactly
mistranslation,
crows. Yeah,
right?
no, no,
Saying
no.
that, oh,
The
they
Koti
got
word,
it wrong.
Koti word has
Yes.
two meanings in
Yeah,
it, basically.
yeah.
That's all.
33.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all.
Group.
That's all.
Yeah.
The devatas are
Correct.
expandable from there on. That is
Correct.
what it is.
Correct. So, haters, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, to me, it's not a fight. To me, I'm not out to, defame anybody. But if you are coming, if you are the direct target in my fight for my own civilizational identity, then that's not my fault, right? I'm not targeting you, but you stand right in the middle of it, then that is not my fault. Okay, I am fighting for a cause, right? The goal of this book, Sureshji, is I want to lend the language. Okay, this is not to defame anybody, or this is not to debunk or hurt anybody's sentiments. But if in my fight you are hurt by my sentiments, then that is not on me. I want to lend the language to the policy makers. Today, Christians are saying that we have we have constitutional right to practice, profess, and propagate.
As per the Indian Constitution.
Constitution.
Article 14. Yeah.
So, who defines what propagation is? Is propagation demonization of Hindu deities? Is propagation going knocking on Hindus' doors and offering allurement to convert? Does propagate mean cultural annihilation of Hindus? That is exactly what is happening in the name of propagation. Now, propagation is what ISKCON does, right?
Yes,
Propagation is what
correct.
ISKCON does. ISKCON simply says, here is a truth according to us. So here is the truth. Go ahead and embrace it. They never said if you embrace this truth, you are going to get rid of, you're going to be cured of cancer and AIDS. Your relationship is going to mend. Your addicted son is going to um, get rehabilitated. They don't say that. That is propagation. As long as Christians stick to this kind of propagation, we do not have any problem. So, the goal of the book is to lend the language to both policymakers and the people on the ground who are fighting against conversions.
Esther, actually, I envy you because one side that you're able to express yourself so beautifully in the book. The second part is that the way you present your arguments other day at the book release and even today, the conversation that we're having is that usually these things end up in a big argument. I'm not saying a fight, but a verbal fight at least. And the fact that you're dignified enough to present it in a very logical manner would possibly convince the person on the other side saying, yes, what she says makes sense. Let me come back with a more credible argument next time and argue with her. And, why Jesus existed in the first place. As you said, he did not. But then the point is very simple. Is the fact that as an author, will this be a first book or will the more to come?
I have 10 titles waiting to see the light of the day.
In fact, you've been
There's
traveling
just so
around the
much.
country, I think, for this
Yeah.
book release across the country. You've been to IITs and other places also, I believe. And now you're going back to the US day after tomorrow. The point is, my two pence thought, or whatever you want to call it, two penny thoughts, they're out there. There are many people who doubt the Hindu religion within Hinduism. The young generation, I'm not faulting them again, don't really have a fascination for the religion, but they believe in it. I would even credit ISKCON, Swami Sadhguru Jaggi Vasdev, Sri Ravi Shankar, for bringing that young generation back into the Hindu fold in a different way. They have their own ways of doing it. Music, dance, inner engineering and all that kind of stuff. But the point is, end of the day is, don't you think that a 2,000-year-old religion, a 1,200-year religion, and of course, a Sanatana Dharma, which God knows where it started, are today being weighed on the same plate. And today you see the fastest growing religion is Islam on one side. You had countries which were Christian, like Lebanon at one time. You had countries like Iran, which is not an Islamic country, being converted to Islam. Do you think India has withstood it well over the years? As somebody said, that we have possibly the only civilization. The Babylonians are gone, the Romans are gone, everybody is gone, everybody around the Euphrates, around the Nile, all have disappeared. But we around Kashi are still there. Do you think?
So far, we are there, but if we continue to sleep, we may not be there. There was a generation, even among Babylonians, where they thought that they were not going to get extinguished. I'm sure. So maybe we are at that stage. We are that generation, equal to the generation of Babylonians, where they didn't see their end coming, their extinction coming.
So,
But it did, right?
so when Ram Lalla's idol came up, Murti came up, when the Dhwajas went up the temple spire, there were a lot of people who said, oh, Hinduism is back. Do you think that those were moments which possibly Modi ji bought in for, but the responsibility doesn't lie on his shoulders
Alone.
But there are millions and millions of Hindus who need to kind of take it up and say, fine, we will live what we believe in. Do you think that is the closing argument?
Yes, like if you even look at Christianity, the one person who converted first, introduced us to Christianity, he was not a career evangelist. He was not working for any church. He had a full time 9 to 5 job that paid his bills. But he was still doing evangelism. Why? Because every Christian feels the burden of taking their religion forward, right? Similarly, every Hindu should have this burden of reclaiming their civilizational identity that was lost.
And
So
not
it's
feel
not
guilty
just,
about it.
and not feel guilty and ashamed about it. The unapologetic Hindu, which we call, that is what every Hindu needs to become.
Esther Dhanraj, thank you very much for speaking to us at Hibis. And I'm sure your book will kind of be read by every unapologetic Hindu, if I would call it by that sense of the word. But I'm sure the journey from this end to that end and coming back from that end to this end would be read by people across India, across Bharat. And that, I think, would be the ultimate victory for you. And of course, your 10 books that are in the line, we would see one of them there. Thank you very much.
Thank
Namaste.
you so much for having.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Esther Dhanraj speaking to us about her first book that she's written, about her journey back from where she came from. And that is the most important thing. What she realized what was wrong and corrected herself. And of course, the arguments which she bases everything on is very logical. There is not a point where you can pick and say what she said is wrong. And maybe those who say that would have to have a very, very strong argument, or very strong facts or proof, as she says. And that is a thought for the day. Thank you very much for watching. Jai Hind.